As European and American international relations are probably at their worst point, certainly since the Iraq War, maybe even worse than that, I thought I'd spend a little time looking into why that is and how it's probably going to all end up getting pinned on Trump, especially from the European point of view, even though that isn't actually the case. Um, I think the first kind of signs of a major split were Obama's comments regarding Libya. He was very critical of David Cameron, and I can remember back when I read that, I was really surprised to see how like forceful his rhetoric was, and he basically kind of basically blamed Cameron and the Europeans for everything that happened in Libya, which is crazy when you think that what was he expecting them to do? Libya's even bigger than Iraq. So if America and the UK couldn't, struggled to maintain control in Iraq, why Obama thought the Europeans would be capable of handling Libya is just, yeah, it's just retarded. But obviously, because it's Obama, it wasn't reported so negatively in the press at the time. And one of the other ones was obviously the Victoria Newland leaked phone call where she's like, fuck the EU, when she's discussing what they're going to do in Ukraine. And you you can see from that there is obviously already some internal tensions, and then that's probably back 2015, 16 maybe. And but once again, that wasn't really reported in the UK. I think it was a story in the US, but we never heard about it over here. Or I certainly didn't. And when you consider that no other American presidential candidate has ever had the sort of vitriol thrown at them as Trump has from, quite high ranking members of like the European establishment. I mean, it was pretty bad under Bush, but it wasn't, that was more from like lower level people and, the mass of the left, but not actual sort of officials and stuff like that. And then the tariffs just seem to have been gasoline on the fire. And you're sort of seeing quite a big realignment, but I'm quite surprised by how quickly so many people are like within kind of the European left and the mainstream are embracing China as a kind of, the new global leader, mark for stability and who we want to look up to. I think there's a lot we don't know about China. Obviously, there's a big sort of PR campaign going on at the moment, but it's a big country, and I don't even know what RGBs are, but apparently that flashing those over tall buildings makes people think that you live in a sci-fi utopia, but that might not necessarily be true. But I would like to go to China and check it out because it's not somewhere I know a lot about really, but it certainly is definitely changing over there in terms of like development. It's coming a long way. But people are, they're very quick to forget a little incident at the Wuhan lab a few years ago and the effect that had on the global economy and everyone's lives. And there was never any kind of repercussion for that. And there's a lot of other things that China does that are not necessarily playing the game fairly, like steel dumping. There's a lot of kind of currency manipulation to keep the yuan or the renminbi or something it's sometimes called, but to keep the Chinese currency low. Like you can't really buy it on freely on currency markets, I don't think. So they basically keep their currency low to help their manufacturing base. And another thing is theft of intellectual property, i.e., when people have patents on stuff. I can remember I used to work as an accountant, and a guy who I used to work with, he'd worked for a legal firm, and basically all of their work was for companies that had patents, checking stuff that was coming out of China to make sure that their patents hadn't been ripped off. So a lot of that goes on. And then there's the other level of the kind of the sort of horror stories of the live organ transplants. I mean, once again, I don't know. I haven't got direct evidence this is true, but it's been, that accusation has been made many times. I guess it depends. Apparently, if you can get a transplant very quickly in China, it kind of suggests maybe that is the case. But once again, I don't really know. I haven't got hard evidence of that. And if you think back to when Huntington wrote The Clash of Civilizations and like the sort of post 90s world, or the post fall of the Berlin Wall world, you would have thought that with some decent strategy, the West could have basically not divide and conquered, but certainly used the fact that, India, China, and Russia all share a border and they all have kind of like issues with their border stuff. You would have thought that the West could have used that as leverage to kind of separate them diplomatically, but in reality, we've pushed them together and they have split us in half, which is, yeah, something that's quite crazy, really. And obviously, China's on the rise. And I always thought that if the West stayed united, it could have at least mitigated that. We probably could have found some kind of balance in a multipolar world. But if the West is split, then I think it's going to be a lot different. And you could see the world shift into kind of separate economic blocks similar to the Cold War. But I'm not sure if the EU will be any better off as possibly even more junior partner to China than it is currently to America. Especially with the Belt and Road program. I'm not sure when that's due to complete, maybe 2050. But I'm kind of sure that the Chinese will have something planned to coincide with that. And it may well be, they will then totally dominate trade throughout the Eurasian landmass, basically. I'd imagine that's their end goal. And then when it comes to sort of questions like which companies get mining rights in Africa or stuff like that, I think the Chinese are going to be possibly even more nationalistic than the Americans would be about that sort of thing. And yeah, while it was always clear China was going to become sort of top dog in trade, especially now there'll be a lot less sort of inter-civilizational Western trade, whereas obviously when America and the EU trade with China, or Australia trades with China, or Canada trades with China, that's outside of Western civilization. And obviously it's the civilization level that matters. But if the West is split, it doesn't look good for us. And then things like, in Europe being all gung ho in the Ukraine, if they find themselves without American protection, that upsets the nuclear balance a lot. And things like that, they do matter. And he's kind of discredited now, but I do remember seeing a few Peter Zehan talks where he would always discuss how obviously in sort of with the rise of the European powers, the empires were all about securing a market because you don't want to be your neighbor to be your closest trading partner, because if you go to war, suddenly all your trade will stop just at a time when you need it most. And then obviously after the Second World War, we entered a system where the US Navy essentially guaranteed world trade, um, which they, obviously they, whichever power is top dog always uses it to their advantage. But it seems like we're coming to the end of that era now. With the inability of the US to do anything about the Houthis, it seems. It doesn't seem like shipping's been rerouted through the Suez Canal yet. It all seems to be going around South Africa. And yeah, the other time there'll be a big change will be when China completes the Belt and Road program, and at that point, we may well see a new paradigm emerge. And I think, especially from the point of view of the Europeans, because I think or including the UK, we're going to have a lot of economic issues in the future. We may well find it was better the devil you know when the new Chinese world comes into effect. I mean, but hopefully, you never know. All of this could pass in a few news cycles, and America and Europe might patch up their differences. Maybe not. I hope so, but we'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, overall, things are pretty depressing at the moment.